Okay, let's shift our attention back to the pigskin and talk a little Cleveland Browns today. Little news coming out of Berea from Mary Kay I want to get to. The draft is in the books, and how we get ready for the next. It'll be in our nation's capital next year. Let's bring on Nick Shook. He'll handle it all for us. NFL.com. Nick, good afternoon. How we doing?
I'm fantastic. Thanks for having me.
Good, man. How's the Twitch thing going? Good. You've been busy?
Oh, Sam.
You pop up all the time, man.
Last night, the number 5 ranked Kent State Golden Flashes beat number 2 USC in Los Angeles. The Big Ten Flashes are rolling, baby. We're cooking.
I've been following you. I got to admit, it's pretty compelling stuff.
Awesome, thank you.
I've been watching. So let's see. Where do I want to start first? Let's start with the draft. We'll work our way back to the Browns, and I guess this will be about both the Browns and the draft. But they got some pretty high grades across all the platforms and across a lot of the publications and everybody across the country. What kind of draft do you think Andrew Berry and the crew had up in Berea?
Yeah, you can add me to the group of people giving them high grades.
Okay.
I don't really believe in draft grades because we really don't know what we're getting from many of these players for 2 to 3 years. So I think it's kind of a wasted exercise, but I understand the immediate need for post-draft reaction and evaluation. And I think that when we evaluate the draft, we think about how did this, general manager, how did this front office navigate the draft, make the picks where you think you get the most value. And I thought Andrew Berry did a great job moving from 6 down to 9, still getting the tackle that he wanted at 6. They get him at 9. You save a little bit of money on the annual salary. You also pick up another pick that they then use. They then have in their pocket to be able to maneuver accordingly. So, you come away from your first 4 picks and you've got Spencer Fano, you've got Denzel Boston, you've got Casey Concepcion, and you have Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, a guy that a lot of people, including myself, thought was going to go in the teens to the 20s of the first round, was still available there in the back end of the second round. Kind of reminded me a decent amount of when Barry traded back up into the second round to get Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. What was that, 5 years ago now?
Yeah.
And so I think he receives an A for good maneuvering and navigation of the draft, especially in the all-important first 2 rounds. And I like the picks. Now, there are questions about all of these players in one capacity or another, but that usually is the case. There's never really a perfect prospect. Fano, do you think he's going to be a long-term tackle given his measurables, or does he play guard? I kind of lean toward him potentially playing guard, but I think as time goes on, anybody who's in the question mark area, I tend to want to move him to guard because I think that they just have higher potential as a guard. But the Browns find a tackle I think that they believe is going to play tackle and played tackle very well at Utah. Then you get Concepcion, a run after catch guy out of Texas A&M, explosive player. Needs to improve his hands a little bit. But overall, I think that he's a guy that will fit perfectly into this receiving corps. Somebody that they desperately needed, a playmaker who can make a play after getting his hands on the football. And I think he'll fill that role. Then you get the inverse of him, the opposite in Denzel Boston, which is going to be a red zone nightmare for opposing defenses, a guy that can go win the 50-50 balls, can post up defenders. And so you kind of have a diverse receiving corps now that you've added to with these 2 picks. And then McNeil-Warren, I think, is just one of those best player available, dynamic player at safety. Questions about whether the level of competition in the MAC is kind of fooling everyone into thinking he's better than he is. But we've seen guys come out of the MAC and make a difference before. I won't take Max Lander in my vicinity, so I think that's also a great pick for the Browns. So he goes 4 for 4 there. And if you want to add in the Austin Barber pick too, another depth guy, a potential swing tackle. It's just a very solid first 5 picks spent and a second straight really strong draft. Hopefully these players produce as well as last year's class did.
Yeah, man, I thought it was pretty good. And of course, I'm hoping and praying now if Andrew could put together a trifecta of drafts like that would do wonders for this organization. Nick Shook is our guest, does a great job, NFL.com. You know what? I like this kid out of Cincinnati, the Royer, the tight end. Calm me down here, Nick. It's a 5th round pick, but I just like his game. I think he's got a shot to do some stuff in the NFL.
Yeah. They needed a second tight end opposite Harold Fannin. That was actually one of the points that, not to say that we as a collective football world were overvaluing Harold Fannin, but I thought a lot of what he did well was in complement to David Njoku because they're slightly different types of tight ends. And I think moving him to tight end 1 might be a big leap that maybe he's not entirely prepared for. I could be wrong, but he was a volume pass catcher at Bowling Green. And he obviously made a lot of plays for the Browns last year, but he wasn't even your number 1 tight end. And I think it was essential that they added a second tight end. Now you get a guy, who's in Royer, who was a 2-year starter at Cincinnati. He was a former Buckeye. And he's got strong hands through the collision, which will you'll like that, because that was Browns fans' biggest issue with Njoku, is just the random drops that he would have. He would have phenomenal one-handed catches. And David Njoku, by the way, is one of my favorite people from my time when I covered the Browns. But we're all flawed in one way or another. I agree with you that you can be excited about him as Joe Royer as a day 3 pick. I wouldn't put high expectations on him, but I thought it was paramount for them to add to the position group. That wasn't the only player that they added. They also had Jack Stoll. But I think really deepening that group is important for them, especially with this uncertainty at quarterback. Yes, you added 2 receivers as well. So you're kind of, building out the entire pass catching unit. But oftentimes when you have quarterback instability, your favorite guy is a tight end. So it's good to add there.
I want to kind of recircle a little bit to my first question. I talked to some other people this week on the air about it, and I made a point to stay away from saying, "Hey, so and so, what kind of a draft grade would you give Andrew Berry?" I wanted to stay away from that. And my questions was, and I'll do the same thing with you, Nick. What did you think of Andrew's philosophy in planning for the draft?
That's a good question. It's funny because I was reading something that Les Snead said yesterday about not doing top 30 visits because they didn't want to give teams around them a hint of who they were looking at. I think that, I don't know if it was planning so much. I think he did a great job of addressing the needs, if that makes sense. I do believe that there's a bit of an overvaluation on some of the players that they added to the offensive line. Like trading for Titus Howard and then handing him that contract, I don't really think that's going to age all that well, but it's really hard to find competent offensive linemen, and I think he's a competent right tackle, and they needed, they obviously 4 of their 5 starters were going to be gone this offseason, so they needed to throw a lot of resources at it. I like the pickup of Elton Jenkins at center. If he can stay healthy, he'll be a very good player for them, and he would represent an upgrade over Ethan Posick, but that's if he can stay healthy, which has been the big question mark. I like the draft of Parker Brailsford. I think a future center that you could put in there. Getting him, later in the draft was good. And I like that they, again, another player that maybe upside is there, but overvaluing at this point is Zion Johnson. But what they did was they acknowledged their biggest weaknesses, and they did not hide from them. They did not say, oh, well, we're fine there with X, Y, and Z. They said, no, we're going to dedicate a lot of our resources this offseason toward fixing these things. And then we'll get to the draft and be able to address some of the remaining areas of need with the best players available. So I thought that it was a good approach. It's not a perfect formula, and it's not a perfect team by any means. But I do think that there's reason for Browns fans to feel a little bit more excited about this team than they were at this time last year. I do have some questions about the defense. I think that the secondary, they might overvalue it a little bit. There were a good amount of departures there this offseason that I'm kind of concerned to see how those pan out, but that's why I like selecting Emmanuel McNeil-Warren, because it gives you a young playmaker who I think is going to be versatile enough to use in a number of different spots.
Nick Shook is our guest, NFL.com. I'm of the belief, Nick, I think we're about 3 or 4 years away from being a team that can consistently maybe grab 10, 11, 12 wins and, maybe compete for the division, maybe get a wild card. I don't think we're going to win, more than a handful of games this year, but I'm okay with it because, like I said, if you can string another great draft together with the group of 4 to 8 to 12 guys that are going to be in this organization now, you're going to have them on their rookie contract. I will be ecstatic with that, because then that shows me that they maybe have turned the corner with the way they go about making decisions, the way they go about looking and acquiring talent. And I think better days are ahead. It just might not be right around the corner.
Well, first off, I have to give you a tip of the cap that I'm not wearing for being the eternal optimist in this scenario, because most Browns fans would say the opposite. But you're right. I think that none of that comes true unless you figure out quarterback. We all know that. And that's what's holding them back the most as of now, is the fact that they don't have a real answer at quarterback. But we also should look back in the last few years and consider the fact that, like, let's take the Kansas City Chiefs, for example, or let's take the Buffalo Bills, even the Cincinnati Bengals. As soon as you pay your franchise quarterback, your financial power is not as strong as it once was to improve the team around you. How you go about navigating that and figuring out exactly what you're going to address will determine whether you're a perennial contender or a team like the Bengals, who have just hung right below the line to make the playoffs over the last few years because they haven't dedicated enough of their resources to the defensive side of the ball. What Kansas City's done over the last 7-8 years has been remarkable. What the Patriots did over 2 decades was remarkable, but a lot of that had to do with the fact that Tom Brady was never making maximum money, so they always had a little bit more to play with. The Browns have been in this situation that these top teams are in because they've been dedicating so much of their salary cap space to Deshaun Watson. Now, they've lessened that every year by extending or by restructuring him and tacking on void years, which is a bill that's going to come due starting after this year. But they haven't been in the situation that a lot of these young contending teams are, which is that we have a rookie quarterback. He's on a rookie deal. We can throw money at other things. We can become very good very quickly. They've been doing the opposite. And I think that they're finally coming back to the middle now where they're coming to the end of the Deshaun Watson deal. They've nailed they've nailed one draft. Hopefully they nailed this one as well. And it kind of brings more sense to your point, which is that if they can do a third draft and figure out quarterback, then your prediction can come true. It's a big question mark, though, and it's hard to time up the windows because let's think about Myles Garrett, near 30 years old. If they're good in 2 or 3 years, but Myles Garrett is 33 years old, is he still the same player?
No
is Denzel Ward still the same cornerback? Carson Schwarzenegger is still going to be the same linebacker, but it's really hard to time all this stuff together, which is why nailing those drafts in succession matters more than anything. The biggest thing on their checklist now that they're obviously not going to answer this offseason is quarterback, but it's a good, couple of building blocks toward a better future, I think.
Kind of getting some reports out of Berea, Nick, and again, it was voluntary camp, and it's, guys thrown against there, but a lot of folks, the beat writers are saying, hey, it's not even close. It's not even close.
Of course it isn't.
It's so far ahead of Shedeur. But again, here we are. We're at the end of the contract almost for Watson. You don't really know 100% what you have with Shedeur because of lack of reps and lack of everything else. How do they maneuver through this situation in the next couple of years, knowing that outside of this 2-year crunch that they're going to have somebody to lead them for the next 8 to 10 years?
Yeah.
How do you get through this?
Well, you don't want to be the Arizona Cardinals. You don't want to be Jacoby Brissett or Gardner Minshew at this point. So it could be worse. But it's funny because, I've kind of been asked this question over the last few months. Well, how do you see the Browns quarterback room panning out next year? Deshaun Watson's going to come back from injury, yada, yada. Who's going to be the favorite? And I'm like, it's going to be Deshaun Watson by a mile for 2 reasons. 1, he's more talented. He's always been more talented. Yeah. 2, he's healthy. And 3, you got to get something out of that contract. And I think it was all obvious once Jimmy Haslam started to change his tune, which was the big swing and a miss from last year. He's like, well, maybe the big swing and a miss, you can recover from that and it can become a home run or whatever he said. It was something along those lines, right? And that's when I was like, okay, yeah, they're doing it. Like, he's definitely going to be QB1 from the jump. That's going to be the plan. And you hope that he still has some of what he had in him 5 years ago now and can produce. We'll always point back to that game, that second half against Baltimore, right before he got hurt a few seasons ago, as the one little glimpse of what could be. And maybe he can rediscover some of that this year and they can find some stability. The downside to that is that if he's actually effective and he's effective enough, you end up in a contract year, which he's in right now, where you're like, do we consider extending him? He's 30 years old. He's still going to have a lot of tread left on those tires if he can play well. It could be a fortunate set of circumstances and where you're like, you don't have to spend a draft pick on a guy, but it also is I think, something that a lot of people aren't seeing as a possibility because right now there's no belief in Deshaun Watson, understandably so. He's been the worst quarterback in the league the last time he played, which is 2 seasons ago. And there's no real reason to believe that he's going to be much better than that until he proves it. But yeah, it's going to be him. It has to be him. You're paying him too much money for him not to be him. And sorry for all the Shedeur Sanders fans out there, but it's a fact of the matter. Money talks in this business, and he's getting paid a lot of money, and they got to get something from him. And you hope that he can be the guy that he was 5 years ago. And you know what? If he is, it'll be a good set of circumstances, I think, for the Browns to try to navigate. And if not, you got Shedeur Sanders, and you got your package option guy, Taylon Green, who maybe if you can figure out how to fix his form and figure out where he's throwing the football consistently, maybe he could be something down the line, but I wouldn't put too much expectation on him.
No, numbers are unbelievable, but yeah, the execution is not good. Nick Shook is our guest, NFL.com. One more, and we'll let you roll. This has to do with the draft. I just kind of wanted to get your thoughts on, I think I saw the final 3-day number. It was over 800,000 people in Pittsburgh for the draft Thursday, Friday, Saturday, over 320,000 on Thursday. Next year it goes to our nation's capital. We kind of got ripped off because we had
you don't say.
You know what I'm saying? We had the year after COVID, 160,000. The weather was bad, all kind of restrictions. Any chance that the NFL throws us a bone, say, around 2029 or 2030 with the new stadium opening up?
I think that the target date of 2029 makes a lot of sense for a number of different events. There's the theory about having a Super Bowl here. Usually the NFL, when you build a new stadium, they get you one. There is a hotel minimum that Cleveland doesn't currently meet, I believe, for that to happen. So they're going to have to build some more hotels in the general area for that to happen. I wouldn't be surprised if they considered Cleveland again. The setup at the time, and I thought about this actually a lot over the last couple of weeks because the weather in this area has been so volatile. Between Cleveland and the Akron-Canton area, it's been massively different. I was down in Akron on Sunday. It was 15, 20 degrees warmer than it was up by the time I got home that day.
Right.
And it just speaks to the unpredictability of the nature. And when you have an outdoor event like that, sometimes you can run into some bad weather, which is exactly what happened to us that year. That was also the year, like you said, after COVID, where you had to be vaccinated. And this is when people were first getting vaccinated to be inside the general draft canopy. And it was all like box seats instead of a big crowd. It was just like exclusionary because it had to be. Right. And so the whole environment and the feel of everything just was off. I was there the first couple of days. I did day 3 from home because it just wasn't worth being there because you couldn't get close to anything. And I remember at the time just thinking, oh, man, this is really unfortunate that these are the circumstances surrounding this for Cleveland because nobody loves the draft like Cleveland, and they would usually show out. Yeah. So I could imagine that at some point it would come back in the rotation. If you want to look at a comparison, we're still in the first 5 to 7 years of moving the draft around. It used to be in Radio City. Scheduling conflict forced them to take it elsewhere. They've moved it ever since. And if you want to find a comparison, you think about Super Bowl sites. But Super Bowl sites are limited to warm weather climates and relatively new stadiums. Vegas is already back on the schedule for their second Super Bowl. I was just covering that 2 years ago. And I knew in that moment, despite the logistical nightmare that it became on Friday and Saturday night, that they were going to go back there. Allegiant Stadium's too nice. It's too big of a city. It's going to happen. I don't know if you can say the same about Cleveland, but you can say the same about Cleveland's fan base. They will show out for a draft. So if you're the league and you're looking, all right, where can we get a big crowd? Chicago, Green Bay, Pittsburgh, Detroit, all cities that have been hit by the draft. Cleveland. I would imagine that you might see maybe Philly, maybe some sort of adoption in New York again, although I feel like they're probably going to stay away from there. I would think that Cleveland would be on that list again. So we'll see. You also had Tennessee, you had Nashville, 5, 6, 7 years ago now on that list. So they will probably expand. We have 32 teams in 30 cities, but I think that Cleveland would be on that list before long.
I hope so. Nick Shook, NFL.com is our guest. Nick, always appreciate the visit. Appreciate the knowledge, man. Keep doing your thing. We'll follow you, NFL.com. We'll catch up with you here down the road. I appreciate your time, as always.
Yeah, and I appreciate your viewership on Twitch. Come ride with the Flashes, baby. We're trying to make the playoffs, trying to win the Big Ten. Let's go. Thanks, Sam.
All right, Nick. Thank you. Nick Shook, NFL.com, and check him out on Twitch. He's a good watch.